Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? This is Preach Jacobs with the Worthy Cause podcast on the Arena Network. I'm very, very, very excited. And sometimes things happen when you're surprised that they work out for the best. My guest for today, this gentleman is responsible for the book Ali, A Life, Opening Day, the story of Jackie Robinson's first season. Get Capone, the secret plot that captured America's most wanted gangster. And as of this week, Pulitzer Prize winner for King, A Life. Please welcome my guest, Jonathan Eig. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic, man. I just want to say for the viewers out there, I'm really, really excited because this kind of happened organically where when you announced that you were working on this King biography, I made a response about how much I love the Ali biography. And we ended up interacting through Twitter. And I was just like, can I send you my book to get it signed? And you were very, very gracious in signing my book. And I'm really, really excited about that. So yeah, you have a fan for life over here. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Well, thanks. I'm a fan of yours, too. I love the podcast.
Well, thank you. I guess when I'm thinking about the work that you're doing, I always think about the principle of choice. You know, like what's your process for choosing what to write? How does that happen? And how did this King biography start from start to finish? How did that happen?
You know, you can only look back on it and try to explain the process and how it happens because you're in the moment. You're not even sure why you're choosing one book after another. And then you look back on it and you say, oh, well, that makes sense. I think for me, I'm always trying to find the best stories I can, the most important stories I can. And when I was working on Ali, you know, I was interviewing these amazing people like Dick Gregory and Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young, not to mention, you know, all the great athletes like Larry Holmes and George Foreman. But as I'm doing that, I'm realizing there are people out here who knew Martin Luther King, you know, that there are people who were friends with him, childhood friends, classmates, they're still around. And somebody should go around and interview them all. And that was my first instinct. Like, wouldn't it be cool just to go around and interview everybody who knew Martin Luther King? And then when I looked at it, I realized that there hadn't been a biography of King since 1982. And that was just crazy. I thought, wow, maybe I can get away with, maybe I could write a new King biography. And that was really how I started.
Wow. You know, one of the things that I think strikes me as a young Black guy that's in the South, I really resonate with stories like King. And when I think about King, growing up, I think I never realized how young he was, right? So like I just turned 40. I just turned 40 a year ago. And so that means that, you know, I'm a year older than King. I'm a year older than Malcolm, Medgar Evers passed in his 30s, even from hip hop culture. You know, when I think about how crazy it is that there's this obsession of these artists that Pac and Biggie died in their mid 20s. I wonder, thinking from the perspective of being the age that I am and feeling relatively young, I couldn't imagine having the pressure of a movement on my back at that age. And I'm wondering, one of the things you talk about in the book that I think would be interesting for you to touch on, were you surprised to kind of find out that, you know, King wasn't necessarily jumping to have this position, because at the end of the day, he was a young man trying to find his way in life as a husband and a career that might be something that might be kind of overwhelming for somebody to be that young.
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, he's 26 when the Montgomery bus boycott begins. 26. And that's crazy. But it's also worth remembering that when they call him and they say, hey, Rosa Parks was arrested, we're going to have a meeting, will you come? He says no. He says, I got to think about it. I'm not sure I want to get involved. Right? He's just a regular guy. And he's got a new baby, 2-week-old baby at home, and he's got a new job he's still getting used to, and he's trying to finish his doctoral dissertation. It's like, I don't know, I got a lot going on right now. And that's human, right? And then he thinks about it, and he says, oh, I got to go to the meeting. And then they say, well, would you actually give a speech? And he says, oh, all right, I guess I'll do it. I'll give a speech. Um, and then the next thing you know, people are rallying around him, and the speech moves people, and he's called to this position of leadership. He's kind of thrust into this position of leadership. He does not go looking for it. So to me, the lesson is not that like you got to start doing great things when you're young. To me, the lesson is like, do you respond when you feel like you're needed, when you can help, when you make a difference? Because he's not deciding to become Martin Luther King Jr., Nobel Prize winner, civil rights hero, martyr to the cause. He's just answering in that moment, like, do I care enough to get involved? And the answer is always yes.
Yeah, I think it's crazy because like I don't think anybody wants to be a martyr, right? But I think at some point in time, when you're doing certain type of things, you realize, well, there's a possibility that I might become one, you know. And one of the things that if I'm speaking to people from South Carolina that's involved in being civically active, whether it's civil rights movement from the past or people that are involved in politics now, I'll always say to them, you know, as a creative here, there's always this encouragement I hear about, hey, you got to move away from South Carolina. Hey, you got to go to New York, or you have to go to these bigger cities. But to stay here and, you know, creating businesses here, I own an art gallery here, do all these things here. I tell people that when I choose to stay in South Carolina, that is a revolutionary act to be in a space where, you know, today literally is Confederate Memorial Day in my state. And there's reminders of those Jim Crow visuals that are all around me. And when I think about that, how important do you think it was for somebody like King, who could have been involved in the civil rights movement outside of the South? Like when I think of a Malcolm X, I think of him being, you know, more in New York, where he's probably still speaking about civil rights for black and brown people, but it's not like being in the heart of the South. And one of the things that King did do is that he went into those places that, you know, were probably the most unsafe. So was there something that you saw within your research that there was a conscious decision for King to keep his focus in the South because that's where a lot of the work needed to be done?
100%. Remember, you know, he goes to seminary in Pennsylvania. He goes to get his doctorate in Boston, and he's dating all these women in Boston, and he's telling them, you know, if you're going to stay with me, you got to be ready to go back down south. You might end up in, you know, Chitlin Switch, Georgia, because if that's where the church that hires me is, that's where I'm going, because I'm committed to going back down south and fighting on the front lines for justice to end Jim Crow. So he's making a conscious decision. And, you know, when he meets Coretta says, well, I don't know, how am I going to be a concert singer down there? She wants to be a professional musician, classically trained. How am I going to do that in Chitlin Switch, Georgia? And but that's a decision she's got to make if she's going to stick with this man. So they both make that commitment that they want to be where the action is, where they can make the most difference. And they know, you know, as you pointed out, that there's danger involved. You know, the Klan is not a relic, the Klan is active. And the Klan gets more active with the more work that the civil rights movement is doing. So they know that there's a real risk involved, and they're taking the harder route, and that's intentional.
I think there's a documentary based on this book that was called South to Black Power, where I was saying that how I always used to hear, hey, you got to move out of the South, you got to move up north. This by author Charles Blow was this theory that, hey, man, for Black Americans to have more of an impact politically, he's encouraging, hey, come back to the South. Because he's saying that it's the highest concentration of African Americans in the nation. And under those circumstances, there's more possibility for a political push. I'm wondering if MLK was able to you know, live a full life beyond 39. Do you see him going into politics at some point in time? Was there anything in your research that you saw that there was any aspirations of that?
I don't think so. I think he really disliked politics. I think, you know, he saw himself, even at the end, the more political he got, he still said, I'm a preacher. And this activism is just an extension of my ministry. I could see him becoming the president of a university, you know, Morehouse or Howard. I could see him becoming the head of a big church, maybe even in the North, although hard to say. Um, I can't. He was trying. You know, he was tempted. He was recruited to run for president, and he didn't want to do it. I think, you know, politics kind of turned him off. I just don't think he ever had that sort of Machiavellian um, attitude that you need to be a deal maker, to make compromises. He wasn't really interested in compromising on his moral values.
I think it's also interesting that when I was growing up, the image that we always had of King was, this figure that is all beloved by everyone. But I think one of the things you touch on in the book, and it also reminds me of another book, I think Tabitha Smiley wrote about King, where that entire book was about all the press that King was getting on his last year of life. And he got a lot of pushback, not just from, the press from white organizations. He got a lot of pushback from, a lot of black voices as well. Uh, what do you see as the image of MLK now that you saw that's kind of like, I guess, in contradiction of it? Like now he's this beloved person that's like, that's on a stamp. But what were some of those challenges, I think, in his latter years of life that you think that the average person would be surprised to hear?
Yeah, there's some parallels with Ali actually, because Ali was despised in the '60s. He's one of the most hated men in America, and then we forget about all that. We pretend that we loved him all along, and especially once he wasn't speaking anymore. Once he was just kind of this safe teddy bear of a guy. And with King, after he's killed, and especially after we create this national holiday and this monument, we forget how much. How controversial he was. We forget how unpopular he was. 2/3 of all Americans in the late '60s said they disapproved of Martin Luther King. Not that they just disapproved of his tactics in Vietnam, period. They disapproved of Martin Luther King Jr., period. And he had to get up and do his work knowing that was the case, knowing that he was going to continue to lose support if he spoke out on Vietnam, if he spoke out on capitalism and its inequalities. And that was okay with him. So one of the problems we have now, and one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, is to remind folks that we can't just like talk about I Have a Dream and forget about how radical he was and how much he challenged us, and the fact that the I Have a Dream speech, the first half of it talks about police brutality and income inequality and reparations. We've whitewashed that whole part of the story because it's less comfortable for us.
Do you feel that you can find a balance of humanizing some of these figures that we grew up and loved? I mean, like for me, the Ali biography is one of those things where like Ali was, probably wasn't the greatest husband in the world, right? And there were things that character wise that you would probably be like, wow, this isn't the best, but you still found ways to have him have his humanity with all the flaws intact, but also able to maintain his importance. Like, did you feel any pressure of humanizing him a little too much in that regard? Like, was there any fear of, oh gosh, am I going to, even though the higher end is him being completely whitewashed as this figure that I think that people like to use a I Have a Dream or an MLK quote to kind of cover up, when people are pushing for change. But do you feel that there was a responsibility at times where you were like, should I put this in the book about certain things about MLK? Or did you feel like you trusted the audience that you could see the entirety of this man and you could still have this really, really full view with his flaws, not take away from his contributions?
Yeah, I had a little bit of anxiety around it, but I did trust the reader. I did trust the American public to take in the whole picture. My fear was just that somebody would put out a list. Here are the 10 things about Martin Luther King that will shock you, based on Jonathan Eig's new book, right? That would be a disaster. Because if you just make a list of the 10 things, yeah, he plagiarized, yeah, he cheated on his wife, yeah, he smoked cigarettes, yeah, he drank, right? Like, it's going to look bad. But if you take it in the context of his whole life, oh, and he attempted suicide twice as a teenager, and he suffered from depression. But if you put it in the context, and this is where I say that my trust in American readers has been rewarded. When you read about that stuff in the context of his life and how hard he struggled and how he persevered in spite of all these troubles, you just end up loving him and respecting him more. And that's what I've been getting from readers. I've been traveling for a year now, talking to people about this book in churches, in schools. Talked to 1,500 kids at Morehouse. Been to black churches all over the country, and people come up to me in tears saying, I didn't know how hard it was for him, and I love and respect him more than ever. And that's, I think that's the reward for trusting people, that they can handle the complexity. As I keep saying, if we need our heroes to be perfect, we can't have any heroes.
Wow. Well, that's absolutely right. There's an interesting South Carolina connection that you have right now, where I see that it looks like there's a Chris Rock connection with a possible biopic coming, and the possibility of Spielberg. I say possibility because I'm not sure if anything's been signed, but I saw it publicly, so I guess I can say something about it. So funny enough, I'm in Columbia, South Carolina. I used to work in a record store years ago called Sounds Familiar Records. Chris Rock's brother used to work there. So Chris Rock has like really, really strong South Carolina roots, and I think his mother still is in South Carolina. But when I saw this, I was kind of curious as to how did that conversation, or how did that develop with someone like Chris Rock possibly directing a biopic like this? Because a part of me feels like, you know, would it make sense for a comedian to do this? But another part of me feels like, Chris Rock has been using his microphone to speak about social change and awareness for a long time. So he might be uniquely equipped to do this. Like, what were your thoughts, and how did that come about that you can talk about?
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Chris yet, but my hunch is that he does not intend to make a comedy. And I think I got a note from his agent saying he was reading my book and he really liked it and he wanted to know if the film rights were available. And his idea was that he wanted to begin the story in 1963 with the March on Washington and take it to the assassination. So 5 years, arc for the story, which I thought was great. I liked that idea a lot. I mean, he went out and pitched it to Steven Spielberg to ask Spielberg if he would come on as executive producer. I don't know why he didn't invite me to that meeting. I'm a little, no hard feelings. Just, we'll get over. I'll get over it. But Spielberg said yes, and then that's all I know. So we're waiting. I'm waiting to see what happens next.
Is there is there something else being made into a movie? Is there the Mickey Mantle? Is that book being made into a film right now, or what's going on?
Um, Ali, there's a TV series in the works with Morgan Freeman and Regé Jean Page producing. That's pretty good. And couple writers attached to it now who I'm really excited about. So we'll see. Lou Gehrig, there's some talk about that too as a movie or a TV.
So is there a process that you feel like there's a difference that you write these biographies? Do you think your brain can shift to writing something for a screenplay, or is that something you just have no interest in at all?
I wouldn't mind trying. I've been involved a little bit in the Gehrig project on the writing side, and it's fun. It's a very different set of muscles. I'm not sure that I'd want to do it all the time. I'd like to stick to the books if I can, but it's interesting to see how they do it. It's just so weird, the movie business, because they talk and talk and talk, and they have meetings, and you have to send it to all these different people for feedback. And like, I just write my books and people leave me alone. I like that better.
What was one of the interviews, one of the people you spoke to that knew Dr. King, or someone that gave you some information from a personal interaction that you cherish the most with this project?
Wow, that's a good question. I talked to a lot of famous people who, legends like Dick Gregory and Harry Belafonte, and I had some beautiful moments. But my favorite, I think, was June Dobbs Butts, who probably nobody's heard of. She grew up on Auburn Avenue with King. She called him ML all her life. And she would come home from school with ML and with his brother AD and with Christine, and they'd play Monopoly together, and they'd have snacks. They'd have white bread with butter and sugar for a snack when they got home from school. But the great thing about June, and I visited her a bunch of times and talked to her on the phone dozens of times, is that she went on to become a sex therapist. And so she had a lot of insight, a lot of opinions about Martin Luther King, ML's personal life. Her sister dated ML, and her best friend was engaged to ML. So she had some crazy stories, and she just had a lot of really interesting insights about his psychology and why uh, the way he turned out. That only somebody who knew you all your life could do.
I feel sorry for any guy that dated a woman after she dated Martin Luther King. Like, it's like, like what are you going to do with that? I'm interested in hearing your interaction with Dick Gregory. And I have one encounter with Dick Gregory, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But like, what was your interaction with Dick? And I guess he passed away, what, a few years ago, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. Like, when were these interviews? Like, how long were you working on this book, I guess?
Well, Dick Gregory, I only interviewed him for the Ali book. He passed away before I started on the King book, but he told me a few things about MLK during that interview. And, he said something to me that really made me think about doing the book in the first place. He said to me, do you know the difference between Jesus and Martin Luther King? And, it's Dick Gregory, so I thought this might be a joke. So I just waited. I wasn't going to try to attempt to answer that question. And he said, the difference is that we've got video of Martin Luther King. And I thought, wow, that's deep. And not only do we have video, we know he's real, but we also have people like you, who, like Dick Gregory, who knew him, who hung out with him, who ate and told jokes with him, and that's what made me think that there's a chance to do a book that really makes King seem real and human. Dick Gregory also said to me. Dick Gregory also said to me when I was working on the Ali book, he said, white boy, if you're going to try to write a book about Martin Luther King, you better try to understand what made this kid think he could be special. What made a kid same age as me, same age as Emmett Till, think he could go around calling himself the greatest and not get knifed for it. And I thought, wow. So he was a brilliant man.
Well, I was wondering when that was going to come out because I know in his older years he was very prickly. But if you've gone through the type of shit that he's gone through, you have every right to be as prickly as you want. So very quick Dick Gregory story that I have, my one interaction with Dick Gregory. So I was doing a show in Atlanta. This had to be like in 2009 or so. And after the show, at the time I was a vegetarian. I'm not anymore. But there was a place called Chinese Buddha. It was a 24-hour Chinese restaurant. And it was a great place because whatever they had on their menu, they also had a vegetarian version. And so I'm in there with a friend of mine. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I look at this table and it's, he has his historical white beard, unkept beard. And I was just like, say to my friend, I was like, is that Dick Gregory? And my friend says, I don't know. I don't think so. And then part of me, I was just like, it has to be Dick Gregory because it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And he's like an elderly guy. What other old guy would be up at 2 o'clock in the morning? Like, if I'm out somewhere at 3 in the morning and somebody like Morgan Freeman, it's Morgan Freeman. Because there's not going to be another 80-year-old black guy that's going to be at Waffle House in Atlanta at 3 in the morning. So there's something that really stuck out with me that he did. So I get up and he's sitting with, I say younger, like young women. They were younger than him, but they were still young. So he kind of looked like, So I get up to him. And once I walk up to him, he had like a strand of like toilet paper on the bottom of his shoe. And I got really nervous. I was like, I can't talk to my civil rights hero and he has toilet paper on his shoe. So without him noticing it, I stumped my foot, swiped the toilet paper away. And I say, Mr. Gregory. And he's like, mm-hmm. I said, I'm a huge fan. I said, my family grew up on you. My name is Priest Jacobs, yada, yada, yada. And I said, thank you for everything you've done. And he said this one thing that I thought was really brilliant. He shook my hand. He says, mm-hmm. How's the family? And I was like, they're great. And he's like, all right. And he walked out. And I thought it was such a thing that stuck with me because here is somebody that he's never met. And he's like, how's the family? And there's a part of me from coming from this Southern culture where it's like, the black church wasn't just a church. It was a community center. It was places for therapy sessions. It was a place to organize and strategize. So the idea of, I know I don't know you, but is your family okay? I think it's something that's really, really ingrained with a certain group of people that grew up through the civil rights movement. So that's my Dick Gregory story. And the waitress saw me swipe the toilet paper off, so she gave me like a free beverage because she saw what I did. So yeah.
You definitely did a good deed there. I'll show you. I think I have a book right here on my shelf. I just want to show you something while I got it. If I can find it real quick. I know I have it right here somewhere. All right, I'll find it later. But he signed his book for me, and he signed it.
White boy.
To you. No, to you. Right here somewhere. I'll find it.
That's such a Dick Gregory thing. He's like, to you. You know your name.
To you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Do you feel like you have kind of a unique advantage of when you were walking in here and he said, white boy, write this way, or you make sure you cover this way, that you're separated to a certain degree, that you can have your investigative journalism hat on, as opposed to me interviewing Ali. I would have been wearing this hoodie and a hat, and I don't know if I could have been objective at all. Do you feel like somehow that you have enough separation that it's kind of an advantage when you walk into these spaces writing about a lot of these Black
I don't
heroes?
know. That's a great question. And I don't know if it's an advantage. I think I have to prove myself a little bit as an outsider, as somebody who's, not part of the community, who's not, doesn't share the history. I think I have to work a little harder and earn their trust. But maybe, like you're saying, that there are some advantages too, because I can ask objective questions without feeling like, I'm like I have to be a fanboy. So, I don't know. Probably pluses and minuses.
Okay. I always wondered this, and I think you'll be someone that I'm interested in your take on this. So I'm involved in different forms of, like, whether it's journalism or when I was working in the nonprofit sector, there was always this concern of AI being used for certain businesses or certain professions, and I'm hearing a lot of ways that AI could be misused or misrepresented, or there's like biases in it. But something I thought was always interesting to me from an AI perspective was that I would be interested in finding someone who has a large body of work. So if I'm saying, okay, someone like James Baldwin, who passed away in the 80s, I would like to take a collection of all of his writings, all of his interviews, all of his thoughts, and based on that information, how he would respond to new issues that are coming up now, right? And to me, I thought that'd be like an interesting way of looking at AI, right? So if we're talking about gun rights in the Second Amendment, I would like to see how, all the works and all the writings of Thomas Jefferson, how would he feel about an AR-15, right? You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like a flawed idea theory, but in that spirit, basically by you looking and investigating and researching King for this book, are there certain things that you're looking at that are in modern times of whether it's a political issue or a social thing that you have a perspective that you think, I think King might have had this point of view that might surprise people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, you can't help but think about King and write in the spirit of King as you're experiencing what we're experiencing the last few years. I'm writing this book during the Trump administration, during Charlottesville, during George Floyd murder, right? All of these things are happening in our world while I'm writing this book. So you can't help but think, how does this connect to what King is saying in this speech, in 1966 in Montgomery, right? Or how does it connect to the words? What can we take from that today? And then, the conversely, what would King say about this today? Often you find that King said it already. And the words are there. You just have to realize, he talked about police brutality in the March on Washington speech, right? He talked about income inequality. He talked about the prison industrial complex, right? So um, we don't have to guess. We don't have to use AI to know what he would be saying about what's going on in the world today. So, but we have to go back and read the speeches, though. We have to stop just falling back on the two or three speeches that we're comfortable with.
Was there any point in time where you got discouraged from working on this project and be like, you know what, this is too much of a hill to climb?
Oh, all the time. I mean, it felt impossible. Every book, though, feels like impossible, especially when you're even in the middle. Certainly in the beginning, you feel like I'm never going to be able to master this. I'm never going to be able to do justice. And with somebody like King or Ali, like this is an important life. Like people care about these guys so much. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can write a book worthy of them. And then you just have to keep going. Like when you look up at that mountain, you don't think you can ever walk up to the top of it, but you just got to start taking some steps and until you get convinced that, all right, well, I made it halfway. Maybe I can make it a little further. But it's scary. It really is.
So what's the next thing you're working on, or you don't know yet?
I have an idea, but you have to
Okay,
come up. I
keep
have
it.
to get.
Fair enough.
We'll talk about it next time.
So I guess my wondering is, and like I said, what I love about what you're doing with these biographies is that it allows me to be reintroduced to people that I might have had a preconceived notion for, right? So like when I was growing up, it was always like, oh, MLK Holiday and this and this and this and that. And there was a way that I could kind of learn him as an adult and fall in love with the person that he is, flaws intact. You know, same thing with the Ali book. And and I think about how it would have been if I didn't know anything about King at all, and you're introducing me or trying to tell me, like, as a pitch to read this book, to be like, hey, I have no idea who Martin Luther King is. Who's this person? This book looks interesting. How would you phrase the impact and the importance of King to someone that might not have had those preconceived ideas of who this person should or be? How would you talk to someone that has no clue of King and tell them, like, this is worth investigating?
That's a really good question, because I try to approach these books as if, like, I'm telling you a story about someone you've never met before, and I got to make you care about that person. Because if you go in thinking, oh, he's Martin Luther King, this is big important civil rights figure, you immediately have your guard up that, like, I I know this story already. I'm not going to read it. So I got to convince you that this is a guy who's worthy of your attention, who's worthy of your time and intellect, because this story is just crazy interesting. Like, here's this guy at 26 who finds himself thrust into this position of leadership in a place where the Klan has lynched 360 people since Reconstruction, and he decides he's going to go for it. He's going to take this chance and take this responsibility, knowing that his life is on the line, and that's at someone so young, with so much to lose. That, you got to sit down and listen to this story, and that's how I approach it. And I feel like it's hard to get people's attention these days. It's hard to get people to commit to reading a whole book. So you've really got to make them care, and King's life is still so relevant. Issues are still so important that, I felt like if I should be able to make people care about this story.
Right. Well, I appreciate you doing the work. Random question. You are currently in Chicago. So are you a Bears fan? And if so, how happy are you with this draft?
It was a pretty good draft. I'm a Bears fan as much as much as anybody can be these last few years. Hey, I like Justin Fields. I wasn't ready to give up on him. I hope Caleb's an improvement, but I'm not. I don't have a lot of confidence in the Bears drafting quarterbacks, unfortunately.
Well, look, I'll cross my fingers. We used to have a University of South Carolina player that was at the Bears recently, Alshon Jeffrey, who ended up coming to my team, the Philadelphia Eagles, and he won a Super Bowl with them. And we also had Refrigerator Perry, who went to Clemson, South Carolina, once upon a time. So yeah, I always try to find the South Carolina connections with any of these places that I check out. I thank you so much for doing this. I'm so giddy. Next time I'm going to have a hoodie with your name on it when I'm doing the interview with you. Let me help you with your merch, man.
Yeah. Well, I got your T-shirt. I've got my Black Baseball Mixtape
Yeah,
T-shirt,
yeah.
and I got to get that hat that you're wearing right now. I got to go order one of those as soon as we get done here.
Yeah. And if they're not available, let me know, because I try to stockpile. I bought like 3 of the Negro League hats because I know they sell out pretty quickly. So when one gets like worn out, I just pull another one out. So I love everything that company does. But thank you so very much for this. I really, really appreciate it. Please keep doing the work, and I'm going to keep following what you're doing. And congratulations on the Pulitzer, man. That was absolutely fantastic. And I had no idea you were going to respond to me so quickly. So I was like, all right, let me get them now, because everybody's going to snap you up. So yeah, thank you so much, man. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is Free Shakeups with the Worthy Cause podcast with the Arena Network. Thank you all for tuning in for this talk with the wonderful, amazing Pulitzer Prize-winning Jonathan Eig. We'll see y'all next time. Thank you. Peace.